wherever the ERV is, you're gonna get transcription. And
are you talking about spurious transcription? You're gonna get some type of function based, because remember we were talking about spurious transcription.
Yeah. Well, but what I'm
to the ERV.
So what I'm talking about is that the ERV, in order to produce the viral proteins, it's got to transcribe them, right? First, it uses reverse transcriptase to get its genetic material into the genome, right? And then it has to transcribe its genome back out so that it can be translated. So that means it has to have a bit in there that will induce transcription. Now, if you lose the viral genes, but you keep the promoter region, you just get transcription of whatever is left.
Okay, so where I'm coming from is I'm saying, and obviously I'll allow you to respond to this, but I'm just saying viruses, at least it's not observed, they do not randomly insert tens of thousands of, say, these endogenous retroviruses, which just happen to be in exactly the right location and having exactly the right sequence to perform some valuable functions. So I'm saying no ERV should have function, because the fact that there's increasing evidence that they have important functions in the placenta and in the embryo, and the fact that they aid transcription in a fifth of the genome, I would say this is strong evidence that ERVs were possibly not the product of retroviruses, or it could be a weakness in the system. But most importantly, and you're going to know about this because you're a scientist, there are cell processes designed to weed out harmful or viral infected genes known as apoptosis, right? So why, after millions of years, do we still have so many viral infected ERVs, ERV cells? Because shouldn't apoptosis have ridden them long ago? But apparently it hasn't done anything at all. Go ahead.
Well, that's not how apoptosis works. But anyway, so you previously defined functional as basically transcribed, right? But any ERV must cause transcription.
Transcription, but also very important placental roles.
Well, no, but you didn't define functional as being transcription plus do something. You defined it as just transcription.
Do these ERVs do something?
Some of them do, but that's not how you define functional. You define functional as just transcribed. If it's transcribed at all, according to you, according to what you've said multiple times, including more than once in this hangout, if it's transcribed at all, it's functional, according to you.
Transcribed suggests function. We haven't done these gene knockout tests.
Well, actually, it doesn't suggest function.
Well, you just said that these ERVs have placental functions, embryological functions. That's consistent with my model. You can have any type of interpretation of this all you want.
It's not consistent with your model.
It is consistent with design.
But so, firstly, the fact that some ERVs have some functions which may or may not be necessary, depending on context, does not mean that all ERVs are functional. Obviously. Additionally,
I think it's important for the audience first, because I believe we speak, and by speak I mean understand, maybe 1 to 5% of the DNA language. How much do you believe we understand or speak of the DNA language? Go ahead.
I still honestly don't know what you mean by the DNA language.
Okay, so for one, we've already overturned ERV from junk to function. Okay, so I think that's consistent with us. Secondly, my question is, once again, I'm going to state how much of our DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, how much of our information systems do we truly understand? Like, that was another way to ask it.
That was a remarkable restatement of the thing I asked you. You just resaid the thing I asked you.
You don't understand such a simple question. If we perform these gene knockout tests on humans and other mammals,
because it's like
what type of functions they have. Why are you so?
How much
we understand it all?
How much of the Squanch language do you understand? What the hell are you talking about?
Exactly. If I look at a Russian,
I know what DNA is.
I'm not gonna understand any of it. But it doesn't mean that if I look at something that I think is junk or non-functional, I'm not going to conclude, oh wow, that really is junk, or an evolutionary leftover, or an ancient repetitive element. I'm ignorant of the language, and I'm saying you're ignorant of the DNA language. That's all I'm saying.
Oh, so yeah, we can tell whether or not things are functional.
Oh yeah, have you done these gene knockout tests on humans and on other mammal species, and how much testing
Yes,
have they done?
Funnily enough, yes, I have. But there are other ways beyond knockout experiments to test for functionality, and knockout experiments aren't even really the best way to do it necessarily. So
I would disagree with that, but go ahead.
Well, I'm really impressed that you would disagree with it, but I don't know what your point is, because like,
okay, about the say embryonic or placental development, okay, I would say it's a mystery at this point. The fact we don't know the manufacturing tools of, say, embryonic development does strongly hint that we don't understand most of the DNA language. And the fact that we only speak 1 to 5% or understand 1 to 5% of the DNA language, and ENCODE has revealed that 80% is transcribed. And all I'm saying is that suggests function. Okay, so that's our prediction.
So when you say that it's found that 80% is transcribed, you understand that all that means is that they got at least one read in one sample, right?
One read in one sample. Yeah, obviously I understand that, that this isn't. How much did ENCODE actually test?
Well, they tested a lot, but the question is, if you only find one read in one sample, when you would expect for something that's actually doing something that's being transcribed beyond a spurious level to find millions of reads across the samples. Do you think that one read in one sample is impressive?
I would say that doesn't definitively give us a function, but it does suggest possible functions. So I want to ask you, pseudogenes, are they part of this 80% of that section that ENCODE tested? Would pseudogenes be part of that was shown to have this spurious transcription or transcription?
I imagine they tested a lot of different things.
Okay.
It's been about 3 years since I read through their work in detail. So
okay, well, I'll give you the answer. Pseudogenes were definitely part of the 80%, and we know that some pseudogenes are actually no longer pseudo. That means that 80% function is beginning to look more and more reliable, as we are predicting. And the fact that we know so little about the embryological developmental phase is strong evidence.
The real problem is that we know that the absolute maximum amount of the genome that could be functional is 25%.
You know that for a fact?
Most, yes.
So you speak 1 to 5% of the DNA language. You know nothing about the construction tools that are taking part in that developmental phase.
We actually do know a lot about development. I don't know where you're getting that we don't know anything about development. We know a lot about development.
But the thing is, a lot of this development, a lot of these construction tools being utilized during that phase are in that non-protein coding region that we, or evolutionists might say, are junk.
I can't imagine what your point could possibly be with that.
The whole point is the trajectory is pointing towards, I understand you disagree, it's pointing towards genome-wide functionality, but based on the fall, based on our model of degradation and genetic entropy, which I understand you don't agree with, that's fine. We will expect some junk, some broken genes, some pseudogenes, but not, say, as many as evolutionists would predict. So I feel the empirical evidence is more consistent with biblical creation. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, but the problem is that again, there have been studies done, fairly substantial ones, that have demonstrated the amount of the genome that could possibly be functional, and this is on a very broad, both theoretical and experimental basis. So if you're wanting to say that it's, the majority of the genome is functional, you're already wrong. You just cannot be right about that because it's already been demonstrated to be false. Now, I know you're not up on the literature,
Oh
but
no,
actually,
I'm up on
that was demonstrated like 40 years ago.
Evolution predicted junk since the 70s. Would you agree with that? Since the 70s, they have predicted junk. They didn't predict.
Yes, 1972.
Is they didn't predict that ENCODE would sequence and look at that the analysis there and conclude that 80% is transcripted. So now you have to use your rescue device based on that evolutionary bias and assumption and say, oh, well, it's spurious transcription. Oh, well, it's this, it's that. Common ancestry markers in DNA has a junk DNA assumption to work. And that's a fact. Without junk, you're genetically dead. And
are you under the impression that spurious transcription is a concept that came about after ENCODE?
No, I'm saying that they didn't predict that 80% of that would be transcripted. There's
actually the point of spurious transcription is that it predicts that the majority of the genome will be transcribed at a spurious level.
Are you familiar with Francis Collins, who's I think he headed either the Human Genome Project or he's pretty
yes, I know who he is.
Okay, and this definitely isn't a quote mine, but even he said, and I think this was after his prominent work with Language of God, and a lot of evolutionists look to him actually for evidence and information, but he said in terms of junk DNA, we don't use that term anymore because I think it was pretty much a case of hubris to imagine that we could dispense with any part of the genome as if we knew enough to say it wasn't functional. Most of the genome that we used to think was there for spacer turns out to be doing stuff. So this stuff that, according to Francis Collins, that it's doing, is this stuff functional by your definition or functional by, say, the creationist interpretation of functional?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if you realize that you're quoting an ID proponent talking about junk
Francis
DNA.
Collins is not he's not an ID proponent like Stephen Mayer, or he's all for universal common ancestry, pawns come to people evolution. I mean, sure,
he is nonetheless an ID proponent. He doesn't support the same type of intelligent design, but he does still support a form of intelligent design.
Well, yeah, God sparked the Big Bang and God sparked the initial life, but
and controlled the development.
No, I think he just believes that God, snapped his finger and, the process began, but it was still all non-random.
So you